The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled against President Trump's order to limit birthright citizenship.
The Supreme Court just ruled against President Trump on birthright citizenship, and seems like everybody's kind of losing it. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. We're going to discuss another totally not at all contentious or controversial Supreme Court decision, the ruling that was just handed down, dealing a blow to the Trump administration and MAGA movement in their efforts to roll back birthright citizenship, which is the long-standing policy and apparent constitutional edict requiring that people who are born in America, with a few exceptions like diplomats, be automatically given U.S. citizenship. It is an unusual policy in some sense. There are a few other countries that have it, but most countries don't have birthright citizenship. And I think you could have a pretty nuanced debate about it. There's some evidence that it helps us with assimilation, and obviously, a lot of people have come and benefited from it, but obviously there's real problems as well. There's issues with like birth tourism and people coming here. There's a whole debate about anchor babies and all of that, but those are kind of the policy debates, not necessarily the law. The legal question here came in when the Trump administration tried to essentially update the very long-standing interpretation of birthright citizenship but via an executive order. They basically signed an executive order saying, we're going to stop acknowledging birthright citizenship in these contexts, even though it's been, that's been the interpretation of it for a very long time. And they don't think that it should be given to illegal immigrants or people here on temporary visas, their children. And the Supreme Court just ruled on it, was like, actually, the Constitution does require this. And so the 14th Amendment is what was at issue here. And I'll just put it on screen. It says, quote, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Now, subject to the jurisdiction thereof is the key distinction here, because there are some classes of people, like, for example, diplomats who have immunity to U.S. law, but are here. Their children, when born in America, are still not citizens because they're not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. However, the debate was whether illegal immigrants are are subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. And the longstanding interpretation has been yes, because they are bound by U.S. courts and U.S. laws, and they can be criminally charged and sentenced under our criminal justice code and everything. So the Trump administration argued that they're not, and this went all the way to the Supreme Court, which just ruled against the Trump administration, which is prompting something of a meltdown among right-wing commentators, even though it's really just preserving the status quo, and there is still plenty of path forward here for changes to the immigration system or more restrictions. Anyway, we're going to watch some news coverage of the decision being handed down and explained from Fox News. I thought they, obviously Fox News leans in one direction, but I actually thought this coverage was fairly balanced and kind of went through both sides of this case.
Shannon, we have another decision, and it's a big one. It has to do with birthright citizenship. It was an executive order that President Trump, on day one of his second term in January 2025, signed the executive order. It was immediately challenged, and now we can tell you that the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled against President Trump's order to limit birthright citizenship. Shannon, we have talked for some time about the president feeling that he would not win on this one. The question is, why not?
So they're going to go through the reasoning here, but I'll just pause on this to say that, remember all those rantings and ravings from Democrats and progressives who think the Supreme Court is totally illegitimate, just a partisan Republican institution, needs to be packed, destroyed, they're corrupt, they're illegitimate. We've heard this ad nauseum from Democratic elected officials and progressive commentators, even though this Supreme Court, which is, yes, a 6-3 Republican appointed majority, repeatedly has ruled against the Trump administration. And in this case, did so on something incredibly dear to him, that he's going to be furious about, and as are many conservatives and commentators. So that suggests to me, at least, whether you agree with their underlying analysis or not. And don't let anybody gaslight you into thinking this is a simple or black and white constitutional or legal question. These opinions and rulings are all many, many pages long. They all cite history from the framing of the 14th Amendment. It is actually complicated. And so there's, I think, room for good faith disagreement. And whether or not you agree with this ruling or not, or you agree with a certain justice, obviously they're ruling according to what they believe the Constitution requires and the law requires, and they're not just Trump partisan shills. So it's obvious to me, at least, that this case is yet another rebuttal to that disingenuous attack on this court that we've seen coming from that side of the aisle. And they're suddenly praising this court that they were just last week blasting and the week before that. And then they just have people have very short memories about this stuff. And I personally do not. Anyway, let's keep going here.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Right off the bat, it says children born in the United States to parents unlawfully or temporarily present are, quote, subject to the jurisdiction of the United States and are citizens at birth under the 14th Amendment's Citizenship Clause. Let's look how this broke down. As we expected, the Chief Justice wrote this opinion. Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, Barrett, and Jackson joined. Jackson has a concurring opinion in which Sotomayor joins. Justice Kavanaugh files an opinion concurring in the judgment and dissenting in part. The dissent comes from Justice Thomas. He is joined by Gorsuch, Alito, and then Justice Gorsuch apparently has his own dissenting opinion. So it is what we expected after the arguments here, and it looks like a bit of a split, but enough of a plurality coming together to say that the executive order that the president issued very quickly upon taking office is no good, and that if people are here, subject to the jurisdiction thereof includes people who are here illegally. Writing for the majority, Chief Justice Roberts says this: citizenship then and now was the right to have rights to freely participate in our political community. Talking about the 14th Amendment, the framers of the 14th Amendment extended that promise to every freeborn person in this land. That's a quote, and it looks like it's a quote back to some of the legislative debate about this in Congress. He says we keep that promise today.
So we'll go through more of this coverage because, again, it was actually very balanced. They go through both sides of this. But what I'll just say is that, like, I don't know the answers. This is very complicated, constitutional and legal debate. So I don't know, like, the ins and outs of all of this and who's right or who's wrong. And there's a good faith policy debate to be had about birthright citizenship as well. But I just fundamentally reject the idea that the sky is falling, that you're just going to, like, I'm seeing all over X from all these commentators like Matt Walsh and Molly Hemingway and right-wing media personalities. This is like an apocalyptic decision when it simply changes nothing and preserves the status quo. We've had birthright citizenship for a very long time, and now we will continue to have it unless there's a constitutional amendment. You can still secure the border, right, which President Trump has done successfully. You can still deport illegal aliens if you choose to do so. You can change immigration laws to have less immigration to the country. But yes, people who are born here and are even unauthorized, their parents are going to continue to be born as citizens. And frankly, a lot of people who were born here and to unauthorized parents, to illegal immigrant parents or parents on a visa or whatever, have gone on to become amazing, upstanding Americans. And I don't have a huge issue with it. But regardless, I do think there's been extensive reporting about, like, birth tourism and people from China coming to give birth and have their child be a U.S. citizen and going back to China. And obviously there's, like, the anchor baby issue of people trying to manipulate this system. And I'm not going to sit here and say you're crazy or racist or anything like that for being against birthright citizenship. It's not. Birthright citizenship is an aberration. It's not the norm worldwide. So it's fine to be against it. But I just can't go along with the idea that the sky is falling or that this is the end of America as we know it, or all this nonsense from, like, right-wing media, when this is just the status quo continuing. And I don't know about y'all, but I don't think we're living in a dystopian hellscape. And I think if we secure our border and fix our immigration system, the fact that there's still birthright citizenship is not the end of the world. And if you really feel so passionately about it, then the proper process to remedy this is through a constitutional amendment. Because it's kind of bizarre that Trump thought that he could just announce a new interpretation of the Constitution and it would be upheld by the courts, even though, that's not how we've ever interpreted birthright citizenship in a very long time, when the Constitution hadn't changed over that time period. Whereas if you want to change the Constitution, there is a process. Now, it's very difficult. It requires a 2/3 vote in the House and the Senate and ratification by, I think, 2/3 of the states. Sorry, I just checked. It needs to be ratified by 3/4 of the states to become law. Anyway, so there is a process to fix this, and already multiple Republican lawmakers have introduced or are going to introduce constitutional amendments to end birthright citizenship. And look, that's the path forward. If you want to fix it, if you want to change it. Now, we'll go back to the Fox clip here, and they do walk through some of the counter arguments, which are interesting, and I certainly do not dismiss. Anyway, let's listen.
Today. So a loss probably expected by the Trump White House, but it is official and it's a thick one. So we'll keep reading.
All right. Thank you so much. Let's bring in Jonathan Turley. President Trump went to this argument. It didn't go as they would like. And you have some thoughts as to why. Go ahead.
Well, this is exactly what some of us predicted after the oral argument. Chief Justice Roberts said rather pointedly when counsel noted that things have changed in the citizenship area and how people become citizens. Roberts pointedly said, well, the Constitution hasn't changed.
True.
And that is reflected in this opinion. It is a roaring decision in favor of birthright citizenship as contained within the 14th Amendment. That is despite the countervailing evidence of some of the drafters of that amendment that they did not want this to be something that would cover birthright citizenship.
Yeah, so this is interesting because basically if you go back and look at what the framers of the authors of the 14th Amendment said about this, you can find conflicting evidence. You can find some who were clear that this should not be construed that way, but you can also find like the one that John Roberts quotes, people saying this will apply to any free man born in the country. But really, to me, I think it is more so bound by what the text says rather than the intent at the time. And what the text of the amendment says is that anyone born who's subject to the jurisdiction of our laws will have the citizenship if their parents are subject to the jurisdiction of our country, even if they're not citizens. And to me, that does seem to apply to even the children of illegal immigrants. But like I said, it's complicated. I'm not a constitutional scholar, but I don't think this is a black and white simple issue or question.
Now, having said that, there are very good arguments on both sides here, good faith arguments. And I'm just reading through the Roberts decision today, but it is a very comprehensive and good faith argument. What is left here is a decision for the country as to whether it wants to examine a constitutional amendment. Some countries that have had birthright citizenship got rid of it. Because many of us believe it's an incredibly ill-considered policy. We can make that decision as well, but we're going to have that debate, and we're going to have to agree. We really haven't had a national debate on this. This has largely been contained within the court system, and it may be time for us as a country to decide how we define citizenship.
All right.
So there you go. I mean, that is the truth of this, that the way forward, if you're part of the MAGA movement, is not to defy the Supreme Court and cause a constitutional crisis because, God forbid, we have the status quo for another decade with immigration, with birthright citizenship. It's to push for this and to build momentum and consensus about getting rid of it and advance a constitutional amendment. And that's not impossible at all. So I think that's the reasonable way forward for conservatives or Republicans who are staunchly against this to pursue.
All right, 14th Amendment ratified in 1868. Back to Shannon Bream for the view from Justice Thomas, who was a dissenter here. Shannon.
Yeah, she's about to go through Justice Thomas's 71-page dissent. And that's what I mean when I say that, like, this stuff is complicated. And I understand why people could come out on either side of this issue. And these arguments are not frivolous. They're worthy of consideration. But we have our decision. And anyway, she'll go through Thomas's dissent.
Yeah, in his dissent, he gets to that point, Bill, that you're making there. The 14th Amendment was enacted in the wake of the Civil War, quote, with the one pervading purpose of securing equal citizenship for the freed slaves. He writes, it was enacted, as Justice Harlan wrote, to secure to a race recently emancipated the civil rights that other citizens enjoyed. So Thomas has always been about that was the purpose of the 14th Amendment. He goes on to say that the court, meaning the majority now, has repurposed the 14th Amendment to protect its own set of preferred rights that the Reconstruction Congress never contemplated and that cannot find support in the text. Today, the court does so by recognizing a constitutional right to citizenship for the children of all foreign birth tourists and illegal aliens. He uses very specific language there. Again, Justice Thomas adhering and agreeing with the government's argument, which they made here very passionately, that the 14th Amendment was about protecting the children of freed slaves and not what we've come to understand it as. You see his language there. He mentions birth tourism. It came up in the arguments, and clearly that's a very big concern of the dissenters. We also have dissents by Justice Alito and others, so we'll read those as well.
So there you have it. There's what happened. There's my take on it all. Like I said, I don't have all the answers. I think that this is a very complicated issue, but I don't believe that the sky is falling here. So that's my take. You guys will have to let me know what you think in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe if you aren't yet. Hit the like button, and we'll be back with more real soon.